Here we are again, quintessential Australian landscape. And I think the landscape fits my topic for today, because my topic today is that life in Australia in 2020 is a handicap race. Now, by the time this video goes up on YouTube, I assume it'll be around International Disability Day, which is on the 3rd of December, but I'm not talking about that type of disability. I'm not talking about intellectual disability, physical disability, mental disability. I'm talking about a disability which is all pervasive in our societies. It's a disability which nobody speaks about. It's a disability which demeans us as a people. Of all the sovereign nation states on this planet, and there's over 205 of them, we should be the happiest and the most egalitarian community in the world. And we're not. And to me, this is a disability, because we have everything required apart from political will in this society to resolve all the issues which come up over and over and over again. We have 25 million people, a minuscule population when you think of the 7.2 billion people on this planet. 25 million people living in a resource-rich continent. I know there's a strain of thought which says that we can't support more than 25 million people because we are an old continent. The reality is a little bit different. We currently feed hundreds of millions of people on the planet through our rural industries. So let's go back. So we've got 25 million people living on a continent which is resource rich. This is not Bangladesh. We've got over 100 million people living on a floodplain. This is Australia. Obviously we have our droughts, which are compounded by the climate emergency. We have our floods. We have our fires. And at the end of the day, compared to everybody else, we are resource rich. So why do we have the disability of poverty and inequality in this society? Is it because people deserve to be poor? Is it because people are lazy? Is it because obviously there's a ruling class and a working class? Is it because some people have got some divine right to harvest resources? Or is it something else? Is it because of the way we were created and the way we're structured? Is it because we don't even look at that, at those basic concerns? For example, this continent was colonised in the most brutal fashion, and that colonisation was not just a matter of removing people's land at first contact. It was an ongoing process which led to the cultural, physical, intellectual, mental destruction of a peoples who had lived on this continent continuously for over 60,000 years. 220 separate nation states who had made their accommodation with the climate, their accommodation with the landscape, and lived here. And if you look at some of the early European explorers' accounts, the people they came across were not sickly, weak people. They were physically strong. Now, the colonisation process obviously was helped along by the spread of introduced diseases. But at the end of the day, over 220 years later, we as a people have not acknowledged, let alone signed, a treaty or treaties with this continent's First Nations people. It's a matter of debate. It's pushed aside. It's seen as divisive. Now, if somebody came to your home and raped your wife or partner, stole your home, took your children away, stopped you from speaking your language, and left you on the margins of society for decades, how would you feel? So it's obvious the discussion towards a treaty is fundamental to us coming together as a people. Secondly, we are a society based on divisions. Divisions which are reinforced from the moment of birth. We are a rich society. We have billionaires. We have 10% investment class, which makes a very good living by using this country's investment-friendly laws to maximise their income at the expense of the rest of society. But we have significant proportions of the population, almost 80 to 90%, who live a hand-to-mouth existence. You say, Joe, obviously you're exaggerating. Obviously people living on social security benefits, which is about 35% of the population, lead a hand-to-mouth existence. But everybody else, well, they do. They're basically wage slaves, whether they're self-employed, whether they work for somebody else, indebted up to their neck, spending a lifetime paying a mortgage off or paying rent in order to exist. I mean, we're better than this. We have over 700,000 children living in poverty. Obviously we're better than this. We have the resources to resolve that issue. And as the COVID-19 crisis abates, we see all those homeless people which were gathered up into hotels around this country now being evicted from their accommodation, but no allowance has been made to create public housing. Not social housing, not affordable housing, not community housing, which is all privately owned, but public housing. So we have a fundamental disconnect between reality, which many people face in the society on a day-to-day basis, and the picture we have of ourselves as a caring, kind, intelligent, forgiving people. The reality is very different. We as a society can be exceptionally cruel. And if we look at the way asylum seekers and refugees have been treated in this country, it's obvious that cruelty has no bounds. We as a society are happy to tolerate children living in poverty. We are happy as a society to tolerate the increasing levels of addiction to gambling, to drugs, to alcohol in our society as people try to cope with the pressures of everyday existence. But the tragedy is, it is a handicap race. Now anybody who knows anything about horse racing, and obviously some people will be aghast and some people won't, but horse racing is based on the concept of a handicap. The better horses have an increased weight, so at the end of the day you've got a race that people can bet on. And that's what horse racing is about. It's about gambling. So you handicap the best horses so that they may not win, so that an outsider, somebody else, another horse, may have a chance of winning. So remember that. In horse racing, you handicap the best. In our society, in Australian society in 2020, we handicap those with least. And it starts from the moment of birth in terms of maternal welfare assistance, in terms of the hospital situation people find themselves in terms of the food which is available to their children, in terms of the educational possibilities which are available to people. This is what the handicap is. A handicap should be placed on those with the most, but in our society it is placed on the back of those with the least to ensure they will never win that race. There is no equality of opportunity in Australian society. We like to pride ourselves in the fact that we're we're a meritocracy, that people with merit get ahead. But it doesn't work that way. And it starts from the very beginning with education, where we see billions, not millions, not hundreds of millions, but billions of dollars of taxpayers' money going to private education. So those parents who have the disposable income to place their children in a private school get a subsidy. That's right, they get a subsidy. Their school gets a subsidy for having their child in private education. While those parents of those children who can't afford a private education, and we're looking at about 65 to 70% of the Australian population, are handicapped because money is diverted from the public education sector to the private education sector. And this handicap starts from preschool to primary school to secondary school to tertiary education. And what highlighted this to a lot of people during the COVID-19 crisis was the fact that when you had virtual learning, those with the least found it most difficult in order to stay ahead in the education sector. So it starts from education. Then we look at job opportunities. Now in this country we have had specific policies over the last 30 years which has encouraged through legislation the importations of temporary workers in this society. Currently we have over 1.7 million temporary workers in this country. That means 1 in 7 Australian workers is a temporary worker. I have nothing against people who've come to this country who are temporary workers. My issue is with governments, both Labor and Liberal, we've changed legislation which have allowed temporary workers into this country. Not temporary workers to do highly skilled jobs to which people are not trained for, but temporary workers who are doing basic work. These are specific government policies which were designed to, one, break the back of the trade union movement, which had memberships approaching 50% in the 1970s, to now memberships of less than 12%, mostly in the public service. It was policies which were designed to drive down wages. It was about creating a low wage economy to maximise profits for investors. That's what this deluge of temporary workers is all about. It's not about bringing people across who've got skills to keep the country running, but it's about providing a cheap labour force which will drive down wages, de-unionise the workforce, allow the introduction of the gig economy, which we've seen all over the world, all over the place, especially in Australia, 19th century economy, where workers have no protection of any type. So we have this situation, and this situation actually pauperises workers and their children, residents and migrants and citizens. It pauperises them because it forces them to compete for low wage jobs, and this increases racism and resentment in the community. Again, this is a handicap which has been unnecessarily placed on this country, because there is no reason why wages should not increase. There is no reason why profits should be more evenly distributed. And we see this in the figures. In the 1970s, For every dollar an investor invested, 66.6% of the profits, 2/3, would go to the people creating that profit, the workers, and 1/3 would go to the investor. 40 years later, after the deregulation, privatisation, globalisation, corporatisation revolution, what we have is 1/3 goes to the workers and 2/3 goes to the investor. A total flip, and this has been created through the introduction of temporary workers who are used by governments to force down wages and de-unionise the workforce so workers cannot collectively bargain. And when workers have huge debts and require a job, as we saw with the COVID-19 crisis, where governments had to introduce a payment for people to have testing, they are forced to work at substandard rates for substandard rewards. Not just temporary workers, but everybody else suffers. This is a handicap which has been placed on this country in order to maximise profits for the investment class, in order to maximise profits for that 1% of Australians that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. Then we have privatisation. Privatisation highlights what happens when governments move away from providing essential service to the population. Nothing highlights the dangers of privatisation more than the Commonwealth Serum Laboratory fiasco. During the midst of a pandemic, a private corporation, which was privatised in June 1994 for the price of $299, around $300 million, with shares at $2.99, today is worth tens of billions of dollars, and today one share costs over $315. One share, that's a profit from $3 to $150 in 16 years. Extraordinary. But more extraordinary is the fact that the federal government had to give CSL $1 billion to bribe them to stay in Australia to provide vaccinations, blood products for the next 10 years till 2036. Extraordinary. And we see this in every aspect that's been privatised. This is a handicap which has been placed on this society by successive state and federal governments that have privatised airlines, ports, airports, defence contracts, electricity, gas, human services, Centrelink to a significant degree, significant sections of the public hospitals, and the list goes on and on. Titles office. I could keep rolling the organisations that have been publicly funded organisations which have been privatised. And then we have the obscenity of the private health insurance industry receiving $6 billion per year of taxpayers' funds to provide private health insurance for the 40% of Australians who can actually buy private health insurance. So the list goes on and on. We are handicapped from the moment of birth in this society, and we see it all around us as people struggle to survive. And when I say struggle to survive, I am not talking about starvation, although certain sections of the population do without meals. I'm not talking about the fact that we have a social security system which offers people a pittance. I'm talking about that struggle of survival, that everyday struggle of survival that small business people, wage earners, majority of wage earners, everybody, the 90% of Australians who are not part of the 1% or the 9%, the 1% that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, or the 9% that has disposable income to invest, that other 90%, that day-to-day struggle to meet your bills. No wonder we have the highest rate of mental illness in the world. No wonder we have one of the highest addiction rates, whether it's gambling, whether it's alcohol, whether it's illicit drugs, in the world. No wonder the degree of happiness in this consumer-based society, which is based on buying things with debt, whether it's a home, whether it's a television. No wonder there is so much friction and desperation and anger in this society. If you think your life's good, fine. If you don't think it is, or you think it can be improved, I encourage you to join public interest before corporate interest. We have policies which addressed all these issues, address the issues of a basic income, for a universal basic income, address the question of a treaty, address the question of renationalising essential services in this country, address the question of animal rights, address the questions of human rights, and the list goes on and on. So if you're sick and tired of the same tired political parties and political and social movements that give you the same answers which don't satisfy you, if you're sick and tired of being involved in single issue campaigns, and that has been the highlight of most people's political experiences, single issues campaign. If you want to broaden yourself out to a broad-based political movement and political party that addresses these issues, that is interested, that wants to, that will remove those handicaps that have been placed on the richest society on the planet, then I encourage you to join public interest before corporate interests. I encourage you to join today, because if we don't have 550 members in the federal electoral roll by June, our attempts to stand in the next federal election will be stillborn. Next week, who knows what I'll talk about.